Hello and welcome to the Daily Atheist Morning Show. It is Friday, the 26th of June, 2020. Uh-oh, I didn't fix my sound. There we go. And my guest, Daniel, is just now showing up, so give me just a second. The gremlins. There we go. We got gremlins. Now we have Daniel. Let me see if we have Daniel in here. Hello. You know, we're just going to skip all the pageantry. There we go.
There we go.
Let me get you over there.
Sorry, man. My internet was not firing up right now.
Yes.
How you doing, man?
Doing all right. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing okay. Just trying to. For some reason, my computer, my laptop isn't connecting to the internet. So I'm coming on this thing on my phone. I don't know if it looks good. I'm trying to restart my internet real quick, see if I can.
We are live.
Switch it around, but
just letting you know, we are live now. Just letting you know.
Okay, hey,
because
you
just popped in.
All right, sounds good.
Just went live. Yes. So, everybody, Daniel Reynoso, a Bible expert, bartender, awesome guy, wealth of knowledge. Daniel,
hey,
it's just one of those mornings.
Man?
I'm doing good. We were just talking about the tech gremlins. Could you maybe turn your thing sideways, perhaps?
Yeah,
possibly.
Gonna do it. Sideways.
There you go. Oh, that's awesome.
Is that better?
It tingled. Well, it was. There you go. It tingles. That's awesome. Awesome. We were talking yesterday about the tech gremlins that seem to plague my show.
Oh, dude, it's unreal. I was, my internet's been working perfectly up to this point, and then I fired up my laptop to come on here and talk with you, and it's not connecting. So I'm just I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to do this thing on my phone, man. It's a nut. So how you been, man?
Been doing good. Yeah, staying busy. Really,
I've noticed.
It's crazy world out there. Yeah. And you too. How's things been going for you?
For the most part, like I here at the house, I got a couple of daughters that I watch at the house, and just kind of picking up some shifts here and there, bartending, and always reading, always studying, trying to stay in touch. You know what I mean? There's so much going on these days. It's just too hard to keep up.
Yes.
Except for you, I mean, you're doing a lot. I've been noticing you've got a lot going on with your shows, a lot of stuff coming up. How's that been going?
Been going great. I started putting stuff on a second channel and changed this channel name to The Damn Show and, stuff like that. It's been a lot. It's been lots going on. I'm taking a vacation next week. Yes.
Where are you going?
Denver. We're going to go. I'm going to have a surgery. It's not that kind of vacation.
Oh,
but I meant from the show.
I see. Are you going to just not air, or are you going to have somebody do guest airing for you, guest hosting, or are you going to just let it sit for a week?
That's a great question. No, I have every show that we do is saved up on the internet. I'm going to download a few and put some hi, this is Chris, thank you for watching this while I'm not here this week, and I put a little banner across there, let everybody know, and I'm going to try to be in the chat and premiere each video and be in the chat as much as I can while I'm away. But
gotcha,
we'll see how it goes. Yeah,
gotcha.
So maybe next year or later on at the next break, I'll have things figured out to where I can let my guest hosts run the show while I'm gone or something.
Right. I mean, how long have you been doing this now? About what? 9 months?
6 months, right at 6 months. 6 months. Every freaking day.
You're just taking off, man.
Except Sundays, the Lord's Day. We don't work on the Lord's Day.
That's right. You gotta respect that Sabbath. That's for sure.
Don't want to get stoned to death. Well, just not to death.
Depends on exactly. Depends on the kind of stoning we're talking about, right?
Yeah, just into a stupor would be good.
Yeah. Just enough. Enough. I hear you.
We'll have to talk about that on Weed Wednesday. Anyway, I want to say hi to everybody in the chat. Tons of mice is here. Stitix, the empathetic atheist. Good morning, Justin. We have
what's up, Justin?
the regular damnation. Thank you, native atheist, for that one. And then we got a lot of people here this morning already. You guys are wonderful.
Really?
They like the Nietzsche. They like the Bible talk.
Yeah, right on. I'm down to get into some of that.
Absolutely, I'm ready. I'm ready to let you do the thing. Before I want to forget, I normally always say hi to my peeps on, epileptic skeptic, all you wonderful people on YouTube, because I can see you, but I can't see all my viewers on Facebook because we go out to a whole bunch of different Facebook pages and groups. I just want to say hi to you guys before we go too far. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, wherever you are. All right, so good morning, Daniel. Hi, you got the tech ninjas. Sir. Yeah, just agreeing to be on the show. Sick the tech ninjas on ninjas, not ninjas. Gremlins, tech gremlins.
I'm telling you, what? I got my laptop working too. I don't know if you want to try to make the switch, but I can just stay on my phone too.
Pop in on your laptop and we'll see.
Let me see. I'm going to start making that transfer, and hopefully we can have something better going on.
Yes, because we want some quality Nietzsche.
Sure. We'll see what we can do for sure. All right, let me see. Start cam.
Start again.
Yes.
Ninja Gremlins. Yeah, no, Tech Gremlins is what the name of.
I'll tell you, man.
When my wife and I were dating, she would come over and we would go out and we would get ice creams in these like 1 pint things, you know, reusable. You can put the lids back on them. And then we wouldn't eat it all. And she would leave hers in the refrigerator. And then while she was gone, I, being a single man, had almost no food, you know? And so I would go eat hers and I would blame it on the ice cream ninjas. So now if something like that happens, we blame it on the ice cream ninjas. All right, here we go.
All right, let me see if I can do this. Hold on.
There you go. Let's see. Testing 1, 2, 3. There's a powerful echo.
Yeah, I'm going to turn this off here. Hold on. I just need to close everything.
Okay, let's see how this goes. Still echo?
Hold on. Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. It was just echoing real bad. It seems like it's taken care of, so we're all good. Whoa, where'd you go? There you are. Let me move you over.
I just shut off.
Awesome. There you are. Sorry for the tech people problems.
Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, finally my laptop's up and fired here, so we're good.
Yes. Well, you know, as long as it's moving in a not my fault direction.
Right. Yeah. Had nothing to do with you. Or you know what? I had intended to be. You know, you always advise to arrive about 10 minutes early, and I was trying to get that set up on the laptop. I'm like, I'm gonna have to do this thing on my little phone camera, man. But finally it came through. So
yeah, you know, I'm sitting here 10 minutes before. I start the show at about 9 minutes before. So if they show up at 10 minutes, I'm like, hold on, I gotta focus.
Yeah.
And then I focus. But you know, whenever the guest doesn't show up, I'm like, all right, it's 8 minutes before.
Right.
All right, 5 minutes before. And then I'm sending a message 3 minutes before. And you're like, I'll be there in a minute. Oh man.
Yeah. I'm like,
but it makes for a fun show.
There you go. It gets the endorphins going, you know what I mean? That stress response. So.
It does, you know, and one of the things I have to say that really kind of gives me a spot of nerves as I learn about being a host on a show is the introductions. The introductions always, you know, I always feel like I do an inadequate introduction. But if your tech tears up our intro, it's not my fault.
That's the thing, man, you know? If you got a lot of material to work with, you know, just trying to juggle all the balls.
I'm like, this is Big D. We got him on the show. Go.
Right. You know, here I am. Okay, now we just fire right into it. Very good. Very good.
Yes. Now, tell us about Nietzsche and how long was he a dance instructor?
Well, you know, I think that information isn't completely settled at this point, but no, actually he was a dancer. That's actually, you know, at that time, I think everybody in high society and civilized society really kind of had the ability to, you know, kind of engage in dancing. He actually, you know, it's true. That
was a total joke, man. I could have said bird hunting or anything. I was just trying to
I don't know
anything
about
but Nietzscheism.
Yeah, well, Nietzsche is. I mean, he's just a wealth of information. So I don't know. Do you want to start from the beginning with that, or do you want to?
Hey, you know, if you don't mind, brother, why don't you, for those of us who don't really know that much about Nietzsche, clue us in, give us a quick bio on who he is, and then go from there.
We can talk about that. Okay. Well, Nietzsche is considered a 19th century German philosopher. He would have hated that idea because he really had a lot of negative things to say about German culture in general and high German society and the Reich, Bismarckian Reich in particular. So he was, it was before the unification of Germany. So he's actually from Prussia, not Austria. You know, you have the flip. Hitler was from Austria. Nietzsche was from Prussia. He was born in 1844. So he came from a long line of Lutheran pastors. In fact, his father, his grandfather, his father on his mother's side, or his grandfather on his mother's side, they were all Lutheran pastors, and he was expected to kind of carry on the family trade. And he early on he went into studying to the ministry to become a Lutheran pastor also. But early in his life, in his teenage years, he won a scholarship to a highly acclaimed state boarding school called Schulforta, and it was just like the cream of the crop when it comes to education. And it was a kind of a military boarding school, so he learned a lot of regimented discipline, but also artistic. So he really got into the classics and got into studying classical languages, Greek, Latin, the texts that have to go with them, along with the texts of the high Renaissance and German culture at the time, music. So he was introduced to a lot of really high air topics there. And after that, he attends college, and he first enrolls as both a classics and a theology major. But by about the age of 18, 19, he had lost his faith. being introduced to kind of the historical critical method of studying the Bible, and, you know, just kind of came to his senses in some senses, you know, so to speak, and just decided he wasn't a Christian anymore. And he announced to his mother back home, his dad had died early when he was about 5 years old. So he was raised in kind of a household of women, his sister, his mother, a couple of aunts. And he told his mom that he just wasn't a Christian anymore, and it broke her heart. And he just couldn't lie to himself anymore. So in a sense, he's kind of this model for a lot of people who have to let their family down, you know, gently, so to speak, that they just don't accept this faith anymore. His sister was irate. His mom's heart was broken. They always thought that it was maybe a you know, kind of, he was just going through a stage and he'd come back around. So they constantly tried to, you know, talk to him and counsel him back to the faith. But, you know, this was something different. He was just a high intellect that had just studied so much and got to the point where he just couldn't accept this way of looking at the world anymore. So he drops theology. He takes on classics full time. Then it was known as philology, still is, I guess, kind of philology, the study of ancient texts and languages. And he's so precocious that he ends up becoming a professor of philology at the age of 23. He didn't even have his PhD yet. They rushed him his PhD, emergency PhD, gave him his doctorate without an examination because he came at such a high recommendation from one of the top classicists of the time, who was his direct mentor and teacher, Dr. Friedrich Nietzsche. And so he becomes the youngest classics professor on record at the University of Bâle in Switzerland, and still to this day at the age of 23. Yeah. And so he kind of takes on a 10-year teaching assignment. He writes some early works at that point. One that his first work is known as The Birth of Tragedy from the Spirit of Music, very famous book. Little, you know, it's definitely something young in his early, he's got such a long writing career, you know what I mean, that he begins, you know, in 1872 with his formal publication, and his final works were written at the end of 1888, just before he collapses into total mental insanity. So it's kind of an intriguing story. There's a lot of apocalyptic, very cool things about Nietzsche that might kind of come out in the popular ideas about him. You know, did he go crazy because he just couldn't take the weight of this intellect anymore? Has nothing to do with that, really. But he starts this early publication in 1872, and it's just a disaster for him in his field. He's scandalized by it because it's not quite up to what philologists or classicists of the time were expecting from him. I mean, he had such brilliant work up to that point, but he took another bent. He wanted to be artistic with it. He was trying to emulate the work of Richard Wagner, who is an early, kind of like one of the early rock stars of opera, you know, and music and stuff. And he was a real good friend of Wagner, and he kind of used this work to, you know, kind of put Wagner's music on a pedestal. And a lot of people saw him as kind of a sycophant. You know, he was just, you know, a little bit too into this Wagner fellow, and, you know, compromising the profession. So he ends up, you know, other philologists are writing these scathing rebukes of his work, and, you know, he comes under a lot of fire for it, but he continues to persist in this idea. You know, he writes a couple of formal essays during this time. Well, about 10 years after his appointment to become professor, he has to retire due to health issues, because Nietzsche was always kind of a sickly fellow, suffered from migraines, and, you know, he'd just go through these bouts of vomiting and horrible health issues. There's a lot of theories as to why this is. Some think that he was a syphilitic because of some sexual experiences during college. Others think that maybe he contracted some kind of disease, maybe syphilis or something, I don't know. But while he was a medic on the battlefield of the Franco-Prussian War, which he was released early because of these medical problems also. So back then you kind of had to serve a compulsory, if you were a German resident or a resident of the Germanies, you had to, if you were a citizen, you had to do a compulsory year's service. So he did his year's service in the Franco-Prussian War, the war of Germany against France. And he ends up getting released early because of these health issues, but he'd always suffered from these health issues. So he ends up retiring from his professorship about 10 years into it, and he takes a small pension, and he starts living this life of kind of like an itinerant author, wandering philosopher kind of. You know, he's writing these new books beginning in 1878 with Human, All Too Human. The second portion is known as the second part of that book. A year later, he writes about a book a year at this point. A year later, he writes The Wanderer in His Shadow, 1879. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, so once he retires because of this illness that's plaguing the illness, yeah, he doesn't intend to retire initially. He just takes some time off from school, but he finally realizes that he can't go back. He's just too sick. So he's given a small pension by the university, so he's able to survive at least, you know. But he starts kind of wandering around Europe, you know, chasing these climbs. Go ahead. Nah. Hmm. Right. Hmm. Right. And he was not.
I was
His
muted.
works.
Sorry.
Oh no, yeah, and he was not. His works were not all that well received during his lifetime. In fact, you know, that's
Right.
one of the things that he, you know,
So
kind of
what?
opines. Go
How did he
ahead.
pay his rent before he became a professor? How did he pay for the college, the university that he went
Hmm.
to? How did he do these things? Was it
So he
family
got
money?
no. Well, he when he was in his teenagers, he wins the scholarship to the high boarding school, and from there he's got scholarships
Gotcha.
to
Gotcha.
university. So that's one of the reasons why he was not from well off means at all, and kind of winning the scholarship. There's some speculation that maybe people kind of felt sorry for him because his father had died so early, but
Yeah.
he definitely showed some precocious, you know, talent in arts, languages, and things like that. So he wins this scholarship, and it was kind of like winning the lottery. Like, you know,
Yeah.
it was definitely a lottery ticket to a better life. So his family insisted that he had to go, and he had never been away from home. So of course this was really hard on him at the time. But going to this boarding school and then basically being allowed into university because of his abilities and his grades, you know, and then so with obviously his life just proceeds from then. He never really had money from his family. He did go back and visit his family from time to time, but there was no way that they could really help him, you know, in any
Of
substantial
course.
way.
Gotcha.
So, but with the pension from the university after retiring early because of sickness, he's able to support himself. It's a meager living, but he kind of wanders around Europe chasing different climates and things like that that help ease his sickness. He especially likes high areas like the Alps. He hikes all day throughout the Alps. He was a big hiker, a big walker. He would walk 8-10 hours a day and just kind of carry around a notebook and jot down things that came to him along these walks. And that's why one of the styles that we have in his writings from Human All Too Human in 1878 up through pretty much the end of his active life, 10 years later, 1888, he's really big in this style known as the aphorism, which, you know, can be as small as a single sentence and as long as, you know, sometimes he goes several pages of these kind of aphoristic ideas, just these notions. Sometimes he'll talk about something and give it a couple of sentences, give it a couple of paragraphs, give it a couple of pages, then he's on to the next section. And sometimes that next section is related, sometimes it's not. You know what I mean? He's just really got this very interesting way of writing, almost poetic in a lot of ways. He writes songs, he does extended essays. He's got quite the range, you know, of different kinds of writing styles. So but he begins writing these new writings at this time. He kind of enters what's known as his middle phase, where he starts talking a lot about, you know, science, scientific method, religion, morality. This was his big project. Nietzsche's big project was the project of morality. How do we know what is good or bad for the individual, for the species? Everybody thinks they know what is good and what is bad, but he was not so sure. And he takes it even up to the value of truth itself. You know, we all tend to think that truth itself is something that should be at the forefront of all of our endeavors, and he sometimes plays with that, and he wonders why are we prejudiced in favor of truth. This is a moral prejudice, he says, you know, that somehow, and he traces it back to the Christian faith and the faith of Plato, and two places in his writings, or at least two places, he talks about how you know, this fanatical devotion to truth is actually just the same faith that began with Plato, that God is truth, that truth is divine. And through 2,000 years of training in Christian faithfulness and the truthfulness of God, we've now come to the point where we can no longer stomach the lie of God. We can't stand it anymore. So we get rid of this notion of God, but it's still out of devotion to the idea that truth is the highest good. So it's really this faith without any of its external trappings. It's now at the bare kernel. So he sometimes plays with this notion of whether or not truth is really the highest good. You know what I mean? So it gets very interesting, you know? So he has this 10-year writing period from 1878 to 1888, and it covers what scholars consider his middle and his late period. By his late period, he's in full force, and I told you he kind of writes a book a year. Well, his final year of writing, 1888, he publishes like 5 or 6 complete works in a span of just about under 6 months, and it's just he finishes his final work And we're talking about weeks before he ends up collapsing in Turin, Italy. He's like I said, he travels around. He's going to all these different places. Sils Maria. He climbs the Alps. He's in Turin. He's in Rome. He's this itinerant guy. You know what I mean? He writes a lot of letters. Very prolific. He's in touch with everyone. But you know, he ends up collapsing. And at the age of 44, January, he's January 3rd. He's walking out. He's in the streets of Turin. And the story, it's apocryphal at this point, but go ahead. Did you want to say something?
I have somebody in the something you said. I'm running the show, so I don't catch everything you say, but somebody in the show asked this question. Kristin, best name ever, says, how can truth be the higher good? Evil things can be true. Just because it's true doesn't mean it's good. No, that's right. And evil things can be good in some sense. And this is something that Nietzsche plays this reversal. True. I'm sorry, true. Well, yes. That's what he's playing with, these reversals. And again, evil things being true, he would wholeheartedly agree. In fact, he says, he makes fun of this notion that we tend to bifurcate good and evil and think that somehow man needs to chase all these so-called good impulses and good ideas, and that the evil things, the so-called evil things, are somehow negative for the species. And he says, no, actually, even the evil things have their place. It's so-called evil things, have their place in the economy of human behavior, that these drives are actually natural and intrinsic in humanity as the human animal, and that these drives also develop mankind to their higher potential, so that he sees them as growing together, common plants. And the label evil is a subjective.
Exactly, and that's one thing that he wants to get to too.
Unfortunately,
I think that's one of the things that he's getting at, is that people tend to call good and evil. In fact, he has a book that one of his books is called Beyond Good and Evil, and he considers his philosophy as taking its stand beyond good and evil. So he says, he goes, one of his famous quotes is, "My demand of the philosopher is well known, that he take his stand beyond good and evil and leave the illusion of moral judgment behind himself." You know what I mean? So he kind of sees that morality is what he calls he considers morality a sign language of the emotions, that we feel morally towards things because of emotional reasons that we then translate into kind of like a moral sign language. You know what I mean? A moral formula that's really kind of code for how we need to be physiologically as a person or as a species or as a class of people. Right. He considers it, now we live what he saw too coming in an age of cross moralities. We're able to look at so many different ways of living and being and compare them and contrast them. But, Nietzsche was a student of history and the classics and these ancient peoples, anthropology, things like that. You find that people grow up within a certain small collective over long periods of time, and their morality simply is just the way you need to live. There is no comparative morality. There is no competing morality. So that people learn over a long period of time, the physiological requirements that it takes to thrive as their people. And so he kind of sees morality as this kind of sign language of what it means that people feel like they need to thrive. But he does see it as necessarily an illusion, that there are no real moral facts. And this is when he considers this his own insight at the time, that there really are no such things as moral facts. Instead, there's only moral interpretations of everything that happens.
Gotcha. You know what I mean? I want to ask you this question, then get you back on. You were going to tell us about his Turin
demise.
But let me get this last one here.
Sure.
Just a quickie. You post a lot of hilarious memes on Facebook, and Kristin would like to know if you're going to start posting those on Twitter. I probably like to, I guess, request that you start posting them on Twitter.
I'm going to have to. Yeah, I'm going to have to. She's convinced me. She's been keeping me in the loop on Twitter, and I've never been a big Twitter person, but she's given me a new path. She's shown me a new way. So
couldn't hurt.
Exactly. I think I need to.
Might tingle a little. Anyway, so she's saying, no objective morality. That's essentially the bag. There's no such thing as objective morality from that.
I think we've come to take that a little bit more for granted these days, since Nietzsche. But Nietzsche was one of the trailblazers in this area. You know what I mean? He's writing at the end of the 19th century. Christian morality is still, very much in vogue. So is Christianity proper. So some of the works that he writes are just scandalous. He writes a book called The Antichrist, and The Antichrist is an entire sustained polemic against Christian faith, against faith belief, against everything that then modern society took to be the highest good. And there was a sense in which this book, because it was one of his last books written, they didn't even publish it until he was, already almost near on his deathbed, because it just was going to scandalize his family and polite society so much.
Right.
He wrote a book called The Genealogy of Morality, which he calls a polemic, and it consists of 3 essays talking. He tries to use his classical
polite society.
Yeah, right.
You're talking about, this is the 1880s. Right. They were in the middle of a civil war, right, and he didn't want to offend polite society with his words.
He did. No, he
no, not him. I mean, they. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the people that inherited his literary estate. Yeah. Well, also you got to realize the people that were in charge of his literary estate were believing Christians too, so they didn't want the family embarrassed. Yeah, all that.
It was just the phrasing that got me.
Yeah, polite society, of course. Well, I mean, at that time, you got to consider it's
that's how they saw it. Yeah.
Christian sentimentality, Christian, it was very much the height of everything. So his work is really kind of this trailblazing set of works toward atheism and toward an atheistic perspective. And here's the thing about Nietzsche that most people don't realize. They kind of take him as this mystic or kooky philosopher, kind of this weirdo who wrote a lot of things that, it's really, again, it's really hard to understand what he's doing in his writing sometimes because there are so many of them and they spend such a long period of time. And it's, you can hear quotes by Nietzsche all day long. Nietzsche said this or Nietzsche wrote that. And how do you know what he thought? How do you know what he believed? Because there's just so much in there. How do you make sense of it all? And that's actually, I believe I told you, Chris, that I intend to write a book at the lay level, kind of being a roadmap for the writings, because he always insisted that he was in need of readers that he deserved, people that would read him slowly and kind of like a classicist himself, piece together what he's trying to say, So I want to kind of put that puzzle together a little bit easier for people. But he's got this sense where he's written so much for so long. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Tons of Mice had me right on the year. I was just saying about the barbarism that was going on in the world in the 1880s, not even counting the war. It was just a rough and kind of weird kind of world. And yeah.
Oh yeah. So. Well, one of the funny things is that Nietzsche's constantly criticizing Bismarck, the Reich, the Empire. Laughing that these people consider themselves a Christian empire, a lot like how we would look at, in some ways, modern American politics, right? The Christian right and Trump, and they sustain a lot of criticism from people as to whether or not these are real Christians. What are they doing? Behaving in this way. What is Christianity if it's this? Nietzsche has this kind of notion that. What does it mean to be Christian? If you're a soldier, or if you're a politician that's in favor of your honor, and you're basically trying to milk the state for money, and what is Christianity if everybody's engaged in all this worldly stuff? What is it called world? Because Christianity was in a sense of resignation at some point. You had to kind of push away this world in favor of the next world. So yes. He sees this fundamental contradiction in the behavior of the people of the culture of his time, and so you're right, it wasn't all that polite. We're talking about Bismarck, we're talking about the Reich, we're talking about a lot of stuff that was not all that polite, but it was definitely ostensibly Christian, and they wanted to maintain that, that veneer of Christianity, and Nietzsche was there to just take it all down, you know what I mean? So his works really do they're a full frontal assault on the Christian worldview. But what a lot of people don't realize about Nietzsche is that he wasn't just a philosopher. And I say this because many professional philosophers, since Walter Kaufmann brought him out of the shadows in the 60s and the 1960s, let me just say this real quick. After World War II, he kind of went away for a little bit because he was associated with Hitler and the Third Reich, unfairly, unjustly, now we know, but it was still a shadow over his writings for some time. So he kind of needed to be repopularized in the West. But he's considered a philosopher by philosophers, even though he wasn't a professional philosopher. He was, again, a classicist, a historian. But that's what people don't realize, is that as one of the highest trained instruments of his day, he was able to provide this, what I like to call he's a liminal event. A liminal event is an event that looks both forward and backward. So he was able to provide this comprehensive understanding of the history of society, culture, going back to the Greeks, and even before Socrates, before Plato, the pre-Socratics. He was able to take this vast swath of culture and intellectual history all the way up to his day. Because again, he was very well versed in the writings of people of his own time: Hume, Locke, Rousseau, Descartes, he knew modern philosophy. He read these things in their original languages, French, German, he even read English. He reads these things in their original languages, and he's able to synthesize all this material and then begin forecasting forward where all of this is going, which is why sometimes he's called the prophet of the 20th century, because he foresaw a lot of the geopolitical struggles and things that would be taking place on the world scene in the 20th century, just because he could see how everything was playing out. You know what I mean? So when we talk about Nietzsche, we got to remember this. We got to remember that he, first and foremost, is a classicist, a historian, somebody who can give us tangible, demonstrable, products or words or books or insights from a historical perspective. You know what I mean? He's somebody who can give us access to the scientific method as it applies to history. And I think this is one of the big contributions that people don't realize. You know what I mean? His forebearer, Schopenhauer, who he considered his mentor, and he considered himself the successor to Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer was a philosophical genius of Germany who was living about a generation before Nietzsche. And he wrote a book called The World is Will and Representation. And Schopenhauer was probably what Nietzsche calls the first honest atheist of Europe. But the thing is he saw him still caught up in this kind of Christian moral understanding of the world. And so Schopenhauer kind of comes to this judgment that life is somehow a mistake, that everything is he was a pessimist, known as the pessimistic philosopher. Nothing matters, and not nihilistic to the degree. Nothing matters, everything sucks. The will keeps us trapped in this ever recurring longing for things that will never sustain it. So the best thing we can do is just snuff it out and not will. You know what I mean? Very Buddhistic. Schopenhauer brought in some Buddhism and Eastern philosophies into Western philosophy. Well, Nietzsche takes this and he flips it on its head. Initially, he was obviously very, he considered himself a student of the great Schopenhauer. But, after he retires from college, he's sick and he starts nursing himself back to health. He develops a philosophy of health out of sickness. And he comes to see life as overcoming struggle, a philosophy of wellness, of what do you need to eat yourself and how do you need to behave yourself in order to achieve the maximum amount of virtue or excellence that you can achieve for your own well-being. And this is the core of his philosophy. And the core of his philosophy ultimately wants to say yes to life, that even with all of its mystery, its contradiction, its pain, its suffering, its confusion, there's also delight, there's joy, there's just amazement in being alive, and that ultimately we want to embrace life and engage with life and not resign from life. And that's the real takeaway of Nietzsche's writings all the way up through the end of his life, is this kind of superior yes saying to life. Almost a fatalism. He considers, in some sense, that this is known as the Dionysian philosophy. He has a way of incorporating Greek gods into his ideas, and he gives it the name of Dionysus. This notion of being reborn from the ashes. You know what I mean? That life will strike you down and you come back stronger, in some sense, deified, and that you stand amid the cosmos with a joyous and trusting fatalism, that only the particular is loathsome and everything is affirmed and redeemed in the whole. You don't negate anymore because everything is justified. So he's kind of got this empowering philosophy. So a lot of people miss that in Nietzsche. They think that he's just kind of this dark, gloomy dude that has a lot of negative things to say about life. He's definitely a critic, and he definitely has a critical side, but his philosophy proper is actually one of affirmation and joy and embracing and love. He talks about loving your fate. That nothing should be subtracted, nothing can be done away with, that everything is necessary to your particular life, even the things that you would normally judge or condemn. All those things are necessary for your life and for all of life, because for him, all of life is intertwined. You know what I mean? That there is nothing that could be subtracted. It's all part of a block universe, we would now say in our modern parlance. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That there's this 4-dimensional block universe, and we're all just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen next, but it's kind of already written in some sense. You know what I mean? There's this notion that we have we're all like these worms going through 4-dimensional block time. Well, Nietzsche kind of saw this. He saw some of these early revolutions. He was a student of physics. He was a student of the sciences of the time, and he saw a lot of the coming revolutions in terms of major changes were taking place in the physics at the time. He'd been studying them, and he kind of incorporated some of this. And one of his major ideas, the idea of the eternal return, was just a thought experiment he came up with one day. He said, "Hey, you know what? What would you do if you were sitting here and you realized that everything was going to happen all over again in the exact same way for you in your life. Nothing would ever change. Nothing. I mean, every single little thing, whether it's the spider you see in the moonlight or you and me here, Chris, hanging out on this, on our chat here, everything happens over and over again forever in exactly the same way. There is no escape. It is just your life over and over again forever. And his question is, what would that do for you? If this were the case, he's not saying it is, he uses this as a rhetorical tool. If this were the case, what would it do for you? How would you feel about your life? Would you, just give up and be completely irate that, things could never be what you wanted them to be? Go ahead.
If I may, you wouldn't be able to. You couldn't do that.
Well, you couldn't in an actual sense.
Right.
You
Stepping
would never
out
know.
of that and giving the opportunity, if they were to tell you you're fixing to have a life and this is the way it's going to be over and over and over again,
that's why he puts the words into a mouth of what he calls a demon. In the 19th century, they love their demons.
Oh, I get it.
It was like, it's just like, a demon comes and gives you this revelation, So the idea is, if you were given this revelation, would you be, he basically paints it two ways. Would you gnash your teeth and lie in the dust and, basically bewail your fate? Or would you say, wow, I've never heard anything so divine, and, just be completely elated? And he kind of wants you to go, he's trying to get you to develop a life that becomes the second portion.
What I mean? I could see, on those two different instances, if you had a shitty life, you were born into slavery, you've been beaten all your life, why would you want that to happen over and over and over again? If you were born into a life of luxury and enjoyed your life and studied and traveled and had lots of fun, you would probably, that's going to be another one of those very subjective answers to any aspect of that.
And he wants, I was going to say, just to respond quickly, real quick.
Of course.
Chris, you're absolutely right. But I think his goal in this thought experiment is so that he would like to see people being able to develop an attitude that embraces life no matter how hard the suffering was. Right. So if you take, for instance, the example you said, a slave, in the classical world, we have the example of Epictetus, who was a slave but considered himself the most free of all men. Because he was a Stoic, he developed this internal kind of free philosophy about life. So I think Nietzsche's after this kind of cultivating of an embracing of your life as a whole. You know what I mean? No matter the suffering, because he lived a very painful life too. He had a lot of suffering, a lot of loneliness, a lot of rejection, a lot of misunderstanding. But I think in his own mind, he strove for a totality, an embrace.
Exactly the kind of life that the kind of person who would ask that question would have led.
Exactly. Well, that's just it. Yeah.
A person who's led that horrid life would probably never want to even consider having to relive that life over and over. It's a very interesting read, I bet.
It's phenomenal. I'm going to tell you, like I said, he's just got a lot of material. He writes about a book a year. He's got one very famous set of works that's 4 parts, but he wrote each part one a year, and it's the book called Thus Spake Zarathustra, or Thus Spake Zoroaster, and it's basically kind of like a play. He was a playwright at this point. He creates a book where he kind of puts his ideas and his terminology into the mouth of the fictional Zarathustra or Zoroaster, who was a Persian prophet, who was the one that invented the idea of good and evil. And in Persian religion, they saw all of reality kind of spinning on this axis of good and evil, and that everything you did was either for the good or for the evil. So since Zarathustra or Zoroaster is the first one to introduce this wheel of morality into the human condition, he thinks that Zarathustra must be the first one to recognize his error and then take it out. That life is not really about these moral, this moral bifurcation, So he has Zarathustra do it. Go ahead.
Gotcha. I got a couple of things from the channel for you before I forget, because if I go wait too long, I'll forget. Real quick, do you speak any other languages or just English?
I do speak
polyglot.
No, I'm not. I do speak Spanish, but not. I had to learn it later in life. My dad's fluent. My grandparents are fluent. They never taught us, so I wanted to learn it. So I kind of started picking it up when I was about 13 or 14, and I can get by. I can definitely do. But no, I don't speak German. I don't speak French. I stick with English.
Understood.
If it was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me.
That's right. No. True enough. True enough. All right. So on to the next one. Again from Kristin. Should we? And this was, you were talking about a specific thing with Nietzsche and his teachings, and I thought it was interesting how you phrase things, and this question I think sort of encapsulates what I was thinking as well. So we should be grateful for everything or not, and then bad things too, kind of like God has a plan. It's like a God has a plan for us without a God. It's
and
kind
without
of
a plan.
Yeah, and without a plan. So we would want to. I mean, you're right in some sense, because again, there is this kind of fatalistic aspect of it all. But I think for Nietzsche, it's self-contained. He doesn't want to see anything outside of this unity. And again, he takes this notion of unity from the physical sciences of the time, which at the time, one of the big ideas at the time was that matter is finite, time is not, time is infinite. So that they were thinking that matter kind of just switches around and does all these different things, and eventually it'll come back to the same configurations. It was one of the popular notions at the time. And so he took this physical idea and turned it into a philosophical thought experiment. So yes, in some sense, but he would never, here's one thing that we got to remember about Nietzsche when he talks about this stuff. He always talks about us imposing our interpretive powers on life itself instead of it coming from the outside. So that there is no divine plan. There's not even really chance, strictly speaking, because for him, chance implies some kind of order to distinguish it against, when in reality, for him, all of nature is always chaos, and that it's us ourselves that are imposing order on things and through our interpretive powers. So yes, in some senses, you would say that all things belong, all things must be embraced, all things somehow are part of the whole, but there's no guarantee that the plan is working out for you personally in any way that you thought it would. You know what I mean? Instead, that whatever happens must happen in some sense,
So how many books did he write from 1872 to 1888?
Let me see. So we've got, let me just count them out real quick. Go ahead.
No, because he's got about one a year, you said, but he's got some of them that were parts, and then also like he had a year, I think you said, where he just slammed out several. So what, 15 or 20 probably? About
between that, So I mean, like if we look like, so I mean, we can count them out. I don't know. I'll let you know. Got The Birth of Tragedy from the Spirit of Music, 1872. Then he does 4 essays that he listed in a collection called Untimely Meditations, or Thoughts Out of Season. And they're supposed to be kind of these ways of thinking about life in the world that aren't necessarily sitting right with everyone at the time, but they're his kind of, reflection. So 4 there. Go ahead.
We may not have time for you to list out and describe every single book he has. 15 books.
I would say around there. But he also had some pre-writings too before his first official published book. He had other things that he had intended to publish. So again, he's got this long literary career, you know what I mean? And but yeah, you're right. 1888, the final year, he pumps out these last books. He actually, in 1887, the year before, he writes a very famous book called On the Genealogy of Morality. Again, trying to look into the historical origins of what we call morality. Where does this notion of morality come from? Let's look at it as a historian and philologist and scientist would, and this is what he begins to do. But he also rewrites prefaces for all his other books, so you can kind of bring him up to speed.
Really?
Where he is now. Yeah. He redoes all these prefaces to his prior books. then 1888 he writes. I mean, some of his most famous works come from his last year. In fact, even the last few weeks of his active life. You know what I mean? He writes an intellectual autobiography known as Ecce Homo, which he takes from John chapter 19, which Pilate says about Jesus when Jesus is dying on the cross. He says Ecce Homo, or behold the man. And he takes that Greek phrase and he applies it to himself, Ecce Homo, how one becomes what one is. And he's kind of putting himself up as the contra Christ. This is why he considers himself the anti-Christ. And I don't know if you know, Chris, but the term anti-Christ has 2 meanings. First of all, of course, anti is something against, right? So it's against Christ, but it also means the pseudo-Christ, or the false Christ in place of Christ. And he's setting himself up as kind of another paradigm. In other words, for so long, humanity has looked to this God on the cross as the symbol of everything that we should be in life. And now he's painting himself as an example, not him personally, like everybody needs to be like him, but what he's done to help become something different from this Christian model. And he wants to use his own life as an example. So he gives an example of his development, his early years, his writing, his reflections, what he thinks about his writings up to that point. And this is an invaluable piece of work because he's writing it again just a few short weeks before he ultimately collapses in Turin. You know what I mean?
And that's where we're fixing to go next. I've even have a note over here drooling about this story. You said you had an interesting story about his end.
Absolutely.
And go.
It's unfortunate. Okay, it's so sad because he had just gotten, finishing some of the most revolutionary works in the history of philosophy. Very few like them.
We lost you. Your internet died. Weep growing. I don't know if you can hear me, but your internet died. If you can hear me, you might refresh the page. Possibly might help if your internet didn't actually die and you're just. Oh no! I know. Bum, ba-dum, bum. Frozen in time. That's right. Well, we'll give him a minute while I talk about stuff. So tomorrow on Sci-Fi Saturday, I am going to try to get John Hammond. Do you guys know John Hammond? He was on our show for Weed Wednesday last week. Very funny guy, very fun guy. I'm going to see, because I think we already actually confirmed he would be here. I just need to go confirm he's going to be for Sci-Fi Saturday tomorrow. We're going to talk Dune, and I may even, yes, he's gone. Let me put me back up. Oh, and there he is again. Wait. Hold on. There you go.
I've got this weird internet thing. I'm sorry, guys. So I'll jump right back into it. Okay. So, he's just finished these revolutionary works. Very few like them in the history of philosophy. Mind blowing. And he's excited for the new year. He spends Christmas alone that year. In fact, he writes to his mother and says that, that her letter and greetings were the only ones that he received for Christmas that year. Mm-hmm. And that it had given him some sense of the independence he had achieved as a philosopher. So he's still very lucid at this time. Christmas, there's December 25th, 1889, or 1888. He's excited for the new year. 1889 is what I meant to say. So January comes around. He's in Turin. He's renting a room there from a guy named Fino who has a family. He's renting one of the rooms that has a piano in it, and he's an amazing pianist. So he likes to practice piano and stuff. Well, on the 3rd of January, he goes down to the local plaza, the Turin Plaza there, and the story, the way it's told later, we don't know how much of this actually occurred, but apparently he's walking through and he sees a cabbie rider beating a horse with the whip, and as cabbie drivers are prone to do sometimes, mm-hmm. and to get it to go, and the story is that he runs up to this horse, throws his arms around the horse's neck, just sobbing to protect it, and then collapses into the street. And collapses unconscious. And so, because this had caused kind of a commotion for all the the local patrons and shop people around there, the police are called, and they come, and Nietzsche is completely disoriented. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know what's going on. But people recognize that he's the guy renting the room from this dude Fino. So they get Fino down there. Fino recognizes him and says, "Oh, I'll take him back to his room." And so they let him go without incident. He goes back to his room, and his condition begins to deteriorate from there. He's running around naked. He's playing piano loud and singing loudly until all hours of the night. He's crying. He's laughing. He's basically getting into a very manic state at this point. At this time too, he pens several letters known as that have now come to be known as the madness letters, where he sends off, and these are just some are to close friends, and he signs them as the crucified one, as Christ, as Dionysus. He's writing, he's obviously he's slipping from reality. He's written that he's going to have the young emperor shot and all anti-Semites shot, that you can see him like kind of going where he would be arrested for this material. So his friends recognize that something is clearly wrong, and they come to Turin to bring him home. So they come, they collect him. He has a short stay at a psych ward where they pronounce him insane. And the cause of his insanity is still debated to this day. One very popular idea is that, again, he was in the tertiary syphilis mode. That it was basically the end of life syphilis. Some people, there are neuroscientists who argue that he had frontotemporal dementia. There's just so many things that it could be. Every once in a while, you see people kind of providing new ideas about why he went through this period. But after a short stay in this psych ward, he's released into the care of his mother, who cares for him until she dies, and then after she dies, his sister takes over and cares for him, and until he dies in 1900. But she inherits his literary estate and she basically she's his controlling editor. So a lot of the early misinformation we have about Nietzsche comes from her own manipulation.
Yeah, there are so many things going back in the middle 1800s, or the late 1800s that could contribute to his problem. Was there something he did every day? Did he chew on lead pencils every day? Right. He was a writer.
He could have.
We don't really know what would cause all those things, but we talk about a man who is extremely unhealthy, and then we talk about a man who walks 10 hours a day. In the Alps.
Yeah.
So like, it almost sounds like he was like, oh, I don't want to be in the military. I'm not feeling good.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I mean, these kind of things, but just like any people there, I mean, he's got dynamics just like, you know, anybody else. Now
Sure.
he had these wonderful insights and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But somewhere along the way, he lost his mind. And we don't really know why.
Yeah. And like I said, you know, a lot of people have tried to kind of connect this you know, collapse into insanity and tie it into his last works that he had just finished a few months before. But I mean, even like I said, even professional philosophers like Walter Kaufman in the 60s have said, and convincingly so, that, you know, there's no evidence that his works are the product of insanity. Instead, he seems to have tightened his grip around his material. He's like, by the time he's writing in these late works, as he says himself, he says, you know, now at a point now that I no longer write with words, but with thunderbolts. You know what I mean? And it's true. When you read his works, they're just so powerful and such a display of his expertise, his expert grasp of his topics, his material, his wording. He was just, you know, and some of the stuff that he wrote just very quickly. He has a book, one of his late books called The Twilight of the Idols, written at around the same time. He says it in there's an opera by Wagner called Twilight of the Gods. So he writes a book called Twilight of the Idols, and he wants to talk about all these things that we take to be truths are really idols and they're false gods, and that he calls it the subtitle of this book, Twilight of the Idols, or How One Philosophizes with the Hammer. Sounds very ominous, like you're crushing things with a hammer, but actually the picture of the hammer that he uses is like a tuning fork. And so he's talking about a little hammer, and he says that these are all hollow idols that are bloated, and that you got to tap them with this tuning fork, and they just crumble at your feet. So it's kind of a short, if you want a really short introduction into what Nietzsche kind of thought about life, Twilight of the Idols is a very short read, but he wrote it in a matter of a few days. You know what I mean? And he just sends this thing off to get published, and it's just one of the most astounding, breathtaking, just run right through his philosophy kind of thing. He begins with some discussion of the ancient Greeks and Socrates, and he gets into morality, and he has some, this work is where we get one of our most famous sayings that we all know, but it's actually an aphorism of Nietzsche. He says, out of life's school of war, that which does not kill me makes me stronger, right? And so this is actually traced to Nietzsche. This is one of his aphorisms, but this is an example of the kind of pithy sayings that his works are known for. He has these sections of aphorisms where he's just, you know, keen insights into life, into humanity, into human nature, morality, whatever it may be. But again, we never want to take away from the fact that he was capable of sustained argument. His ideas aren't just scattershot, you know, he's got these prolonged explanations. But one of the things that we have to be careful about when we read Nietzsche is that he likes to play with ideas and perspectives. So he can go on for several paragraphs, sentences, paragraphs, pages in one direction, only to eventually come to a point where he's been showing you how ridiculous this line of reasoning is and how actually it should go in a different direction. You know what I mean? So if we were to quote something from one of those early pages and use it as representative of something that Nietzsche thought or taught, we would be mistaken, because he was actually using these things as examples of the way not to look at something. You know what I mean? So that's why it gets very tricky. You kind of got to have an over, you know, you got to have the borders of the puzzle filled in, and that's what I intend to do.
Literally taking it out of context.
Right, no doubt. Yeah. And it's so easy to do, right? It's so easy to do for any of us, especially the less you know about something, the easier it is to take it out of context. What better example than the Bible, right? The Bible is something that people quote because they read it devotionally. You know, you go to church on Sunday, the pastor's up there, he wants to read from 2 Corinthians 5, and, you know, he's got a short section, and he's going to give it to you and tell you why it applies to your life and how to benefit spiritually from it. But unfortunately, we have the parishioners and the people in the pews do not know what the original context of this information was. They don't know what the relationship of Paul was to his church at Corinth. They don't know the nature of 2 Corinthians. So it's so easy when you don't have this larger picture, the borders filled out, to just kind of take and pick and see how it identifies with you through personal experience. I mean, if it didn't speak to us in some way personally, why would we even read it? You know what I mean? But the fact that we can find ourselves in the text somehow gives us the impetus to say, well, you know what? Now I identify with this text. It speaks to me. And what we want is something more. We're after something more, Chris. We want to know, what did the author intend by this to his original audience? And how do we make sense of it against the backdrop of the larger context? That's when we're being responsible with text, I think.
I'm really curious as to what I noticed you mentioned neurosyphilis earlier. I'm really curious as to what it was that that took its toll on him. Was it a residual of the physical effects of his body? Something physical that he'd been dealing with the entire time, or was it something he caught or got? Did he start drinking out of lead cups there at the last part? And we don't know. Yeah, is there a body that can be examined? Has it been exhumed and examined? Anything like that you know of? Roll. Don't talk about exhuming Nietzsche, or he will freeze. He froze again. Yes. So his internet is gone again. That's all right. That's a perfect question, though. So let me look at the chat here. Party on, Native Atheist. Right on. I didn't get to ask him if he'd read all the books, but I just kind of got to assume he has. If he comes back and I remember, I'll ask him. It's almost time for us to wrap it up. He's
okay.
Back. There he is.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man, this always does this. I got to get a new internet connection. Go ahead.
No worries. Well, we had a question for you earlier, and that was it. Have you read all of his works?
Yes, I've read all of his published works, and several times. But even more importantly, I've listened to them countless times. They're all available on Audible. Many you can get through the library if you have Overdrive or Libby. These are apps that you can use a library card with, and you can get any of their selections. Lots of stuff on audio. But I find that really having listened to some of these works and countless times. I mean, I still have them in circulation. That's where you really get the flow.
Yes. Here's some good points to kind of where I was going earlier about the what happened with Nietzsche there at the end.
Right.
The Blazing Wizard Pope says it's a fair point. Back then, a lot of toxic materials were used for loads of things. Mercury was used in hat making, lead in paint, lead cutlery, plates. There was a lot of things that could have caused. Some people had these sort of like we have now. Take this drip under your tongue once a day. With they just lots of things that they thought of back then that are harmful that we know are harmful now. It could have been fumes. It could have been poorly ventilated fumes in his flu at the time, or there's just a ton of things.
Well,
Go ahead. No,
I was going to say one thing that's clear is that he did suffer from maladies from an early age, headaches, migraines, things that would put him kind of offbeat for 3 days at a time, and it just worsened with his. He contracted diphtheria when he was in the Franco-Prussian War because he was a medical orderly, so he'd be on the front lines with these sick people trying to get them well. He had a serious riding accident, but he was on a lot of different kinds of medications because of these things. So, like you said, it could have been a lot of stuff. Yeah, it could have been a lot of stuff. Now, I mean, the interpretation that tends to reign supreme, I think, because it sounds so scandalous, is that he contracted syphilis at a brothel in his college days. It's not definitively proved. It's based on some reconstructions of things that he said at doctor's visits, but there are people who deny this, that it wasn't syphilis, it was gonorrhea. He had a bit of a wild period there in his early college days, but after that, he seems to have never. He was a single until he had proposed to 2 women in his life, rejected by both. He wasn't suited for marriage, and I don't know that he was necessarily suited for the professor life either. He kind of considered at that time. He says that he was withering away studying old Greek metricians, that he was frail, that he was gaunt, that he wasted his time and his energy studying things that didn't make any difference for his life. And that's really where his salvation came from. His own perspective was that he learned to take himself into his own hands again, to nurture himself back into health, and to go after things that helped him become the best version of himself that he could be. So I think that's really a lesson to take away from Nietzsche, is that, everybody is unique in the sense. And he says over and over, everyone has their own needs, their own style. And this is what he wants. He wants people to develop their own moral routines in some sense, their own ways of being the most excellent version of themselves, the things that are going to help them thrive in this life and be able to say yes to it over and over again. You know what I mean? So I think that's really what Nietzsche's after, is kind of an empowering of the individual over and against any kind of overarching tradition, overarching morality. And that's one of the things that he had against Christianity. It was not so much that Christianity had all these fables to it. He thought that it was breeding a sickly kind of person. You know what I mean? That it was breeding somebody who no longer wanted to engage with life, that this person wanted to retreat from life and wait for the next life and everything. The only thing that's necessary is the salvation of the soul. He thought all this was just completely backwards, So he wants people to pay attention to their lives, to their bodies, to their health, to their most intimate needs, and to make those the forefront of all their activities. You know what I mean? So.
These lines of thinking have caused so much harm, I can't imagine, it's one of those things that there's life after death, but you can't kill yourself or you go to hell. You know, they've got that
Right.
little catch-all right there that you go to hell. But, you know, I wonder, when you stop and think, how many parents have loved their children so much that they were willing to sacrifice their own soul to hell by killing their children and ensuring their children got to heaven?
Yeah.
Has that ever happened? I bet
think
it's
so,
happened.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You
I
know?
think, I mean, we even hear on, you know, these stories about women who are, you know, not just women, but people, but I'm just thinking of a particular case where this woman, you know, she loaded her kids into the car and drove them into the river because she wanted them to avoid the life of pain and just go straight to heaven.
That's
and,
right.
you know, I think that that's just it, is that he kind of criticizes this notion that there's just one thing needful, the salvation of the soul, nothing else matters. And, you know, and one of his sayings is that when you place the center of gravity beyond life, outside of life, then this life no longer has any meaning or any value.
Right.
It's just a kind of a middle phase. And he said, no, where it's precisely backwards. In this life, and not even just this life, in this very moment has the gravity of everything that you want. You need to engage with this moment, be engaging with every moment. It's almost kind of a mindfulness philosophy.
It sounds very anti-nihilistic.
Yes, exactly. So this
despite
is why
what people think.
Right. And this is why I always have to tell people Nietzsche was not a nihilist. You know, or I should say, it's not that he wasn't a nihilist. His philosophy is not nihilistic. He saw in himself the patterns of nihilism that affected the entire Western world because of everything that we've held to be true for so long. But he considers himself Europe's first perfect nihilist. He was able to go through the pathos of nihilism and come out the other side with a positive spin on life. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So.
Real quick, we've got something here from Kristin. She said they need believers to stay alive as long as possible so that they can keep giving them money. You know, the whole thing, there is this thing. I don't know. It's a better life there. Like you said, they've set that point outside of this life. It's a better life there. But if you try anything to go to that, is wrong. You know, you kill yourself, drown yourself, shoot yourself, you know, whatever. You know, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
No. And I think going off what Kristin says there, you know, to keep giving them money, I agree. But also in times past, it would have been to keep, you know, fulfilling services for the community,
Absolutely.
the church. So that Christianity and Christian, you know, political, you know, makeups and setups can continue to persist. They can't persist without people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it takes these people to do this. So yeah, I think that there's definitely a sense where the church doesn't want you. And it always reminds me of that quote in The Simpsons where Ned's wife, you know, says, "Oh no, I almost died and went to that place of eternal joy and happiness." You know what I mean? And she's just like, her whole thing was like, "Oh no," you know, she was like scared about it.
No.
You know, that's a contradiction inherent, right? Like, "Oh no, we don't want that," you know.
Right.
But you know, you hear it in these weary voices. Like, I mean, I hear countless people. This life is no longer for me. You know, I can't wait to die and go to heaven. I just can't wait to go be with the Lord. And you know, it's this weariness of life, and that's exactly what Nietzsche's. He sees that people philosophize or people think out of their innermost needs, and he always asks, "Is it weariness that has become, you know, poetic here, or is it strength? Is it overflowing strength?" You know, and I think he's after that overflowing strength aspect. He wants people to be strong and, you know, and embrace their lives. He has a famous quote that says, he talks about, again, amor fati. Amor fati is this notion of love your fate. And he says, my you know, estimation of value for humanity is amor fati, that you want nothing to be different, not forward, not what's ahead of you, not what's behind you, and nothing in all eternity. He says, not only to bear what is necessary, and in no way should you conceal it. He says, all idealism is foolishness and mendaciousness in the face of what is necessary. He says, but you should also love it. You should love all those things, you know, love everything about your life, love everything that has caused you, you know, shame, guilt, pain, suffering, joy. It's all wrapped up. He says that, you know, for somebody who wants the greatest joy, they have to be ready for the greatest suffering because they grow together. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, and that's kind of the Stoic or the Epicurean model too, is that, you know, Epicurus was the Greek philosopher who thought nothing in excess, just kind of a little bread, a little cheese, a little wine, some good conversation. Keep the bar low. You know, don't aim for too high of a pleasure. That way you don't suffer too many lows too. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But Nietzsche's after something different. He wants you to engage wholeheartedly with your life in a passionate way. You know, be proud of your life and recognize that it's special. Like Kristin said, you know, it's got an irreplaceable nature of it. You know what I mean? There's this sense where it's tied to the fatality of everything that is, but there's nothing quite like it. You know what I mean? So live it for all it's worth. You know.
Clearly I I'm going to have to read more Nietzsche.
Yeah, he's a good read, man. And listen to him. Get his audio.
All the audiobooks. Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, I hate to do it, but I've got a Friday thing to do. Me and the wife are going to go do stuff at the place with the people. No, they're not actually. We're going to socially distance and stuff at the place with the people. You know how it is. We're wearing a mask. I look sexy in a mask. So we're going to go do that, and then I got my sunglasses. They're all Ray-Bans. They're like a zillion years old. They don't stay on my head when I look down. Anyway, so we're going to go do the thing. I want to say thank you to you for coming on the show and being with me today and talking to us about Nietzsche. You know, you've been on the show 3 times before now, and never once have we let you go on about Nietzsche.
Oh man, you got to cut me off. I'll keep going and going and going. You know. So. Well,
we may actually, and this time here it was just all right. Tell us about who Nietzsche was, and then we'll go on from there. And we never really got from there. You were still in the middle of just telling us who Nietzsche was. So there's a lot that I'm sure you could go on. You could go on about yourself. Absolutely.
Maybe another time.
We may have to have you back for round 2 of Nietzsche.
I would like that. Sure,
and in particular, if you don't mind, if you want to think about it, you might bring a specific work of his that you'd like to consider. Sure. Give me enough time, and I might actually read it or listen to it myself.
Okay, that sounds good. We'll do that.
Yes, and I want to say thank you to everybody in the chat. You guys are awesome. It's Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. I will see you tomorrow for Sci-Fi Saturday. I'm hoping John Hammond will be here with me and Leighann Lord to talk about some Dune. And if I can make that happen, I'm going to watch Dune today, possibly. I'm trying to get I was like, wife, do you want to watch Dune with me? I was like begging, being all sweet. You are just the apple of my eye. Would you want to watch this sci-fi? She's like, oh my God, kill me now. Anyway, she's not as sci-fi as I am.
Right.
So that may happen. We're going to do that tomorrow. So thank you again. Thank you, everybody in the chat for joining us. And you guys have a great weekend. We will see you tomorrow. Thank you for watching the show. A special shout out to my gold level Patreon supporters, the Blazing Wizard Pope, Ian Davenport, Cindy Plaza, and tons of mice. Thank you and have a great day.